So I want to actually point out how actually unsatisfying in some ways, following just, the taste afferents, pathways basically from the taste receptor cells, back along the cranial nerves, into the solitary nucleus, into that central autonomic network. Parabrachial nucleus is part of it, the brainstem, the thalamus, and then into anterior insular cortex and also the frontal operculum. How unsatisfying that is in terms of a much more complicated concept than just taste, like salty, bitter, sweet. The concept of flavor, right? The idea that actually that food, and its consumption is very important to us. It's very meaningful to us, and it employs and involves far more sensory integration and sensory channels than just these limited labeled lines that are present throughout the tongue, and in the case of bitter receptors, also in some of us in the nose. Gustation, right, and olfaction, smell, which we'll talk about next, are intimately connected. In fact, if you have a stuffy nose, you're not going to be happy with the flavor of your food, right? And there are so many other sort of sensory or afferent contributions to flavor. For example, if you like spicy food, well, you're putting on, a chemical found in cayenne pepper, right, or peppers that's called capsaicin. And capsaicin actually binds to and swings open sodium channels on nociceptors. These are the specialized somatosensory receptors. They're in your mouth, obviously, that respond to damaged tissue. And the very first time, like a child tries a hot pepper or something like that, it feels like their mouth is being cut. That's the perception. It feels like there's injury, basically underway. We learned, though, with experience, that nociception, we'll see, doesn't just, impact perception of pain, but it also alerts, it orients you, it promotes the release of many neurotransmitters throughout the brain, many modulatory transmitters like dopamine and norepinephrine and serotonin. So we can learn, with experience with spicy food, that there is no actual physical damage, that's a consequence. However, we can learn very quickly to sort of enjoy, the alerting and the arousing and the motivating effects of spice, and we tend to crave it on food. And that's a somatosensory component to our experience of flavor. The texture of the food, the temperature of the food, the visual qualities of the food, what it looks like, the sound of the food. There's an experiment that was done where they, played the sound of breaking glass when you were chewing potato chips, and that significantly impacted your perception of the flavor and your enjoyment of the experience. So the frightening looking diagram here is just showing you all these varied afferent or sensory inputs, into the central nervous system, and you can sort of follow the gustatory pathways along the three cranial nerves that we discussed, 7, 9, and 10. And then you can see, the NTS is the nucleus of the solitary tract, the nucleus tractus solitarius, or the solitary nucleus. That's that arrival site in the brainstem where visceral information is integrated, and then things sort of move on. You could also see, there's the frontal operculum is there, the FO. And ultimately, I want you to see that there's the visual input, there's the auditory input, there's the olfactory input, there's the gustatory input, there's the somatosensory inputs. And as they work their way into these networks in the brain towards the frontal lobe of the brain, well, that's where you're going to get the highest level integration, of all of these sensory afferent inputs that are related to your consumption of food and the flavor, your perceptual experience of the flavor of food. So you don't need to memorize, the details of this particular diagram, but what I would like you to get a sense of is that, we're following all these individual channels in, but when they get into these networks in the brain, there is multimodal, integration. And the actual perceptual experiences that we have are far richer than just bitter, salty, sweet.